Hi everybody, and welcome to Chapter 8. We are going to be talking and beginning with ratios today, and what you're going to find is you really know how to do all of this because of your work in fractions. You might ask, well, if it's exactly like fractions, why are we covering it? Ratios are a little bit different. So although ratios and equivalent ratios are related to fractions and equivalent fractions, as you see here, the difference is a fraction compares part of a group to a whole. So you could say that you have 3/4 of a cup, 3 of the 4 parts of a cup, 3 of the 4 parts of a candy bar, that sort of thing. A ratio is comparing two different quantities for some purpose. So if you want the ratio of girls to boys in a particular small group, for every 3 girls there are 4 boys, that is not a part to a whole. That is the ratio of girls to boys. However, you can write it as 3:4, which you read 3 to 4, 3 to 4, or 3/4, and you can also read this as 3 to 4, which brings me to the 3 different ways you can write ratios. You know you're dealing with a ratio for sure, not just a fraction, when you see the word 2, or if you see the colon right here. Again, you can just keep it all what you know and go ahead and put them into a fractional form, realizing it's actually expressing a ratio rather than necessarily a part to a whole. Sometimes we do use ratios as parts to wholes, but we are comparing two numbers for a specific purpose. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that in an orchestra that you are trying out for, there are cap is 18 violins, 8 violas, 6 cellos, 3 double basses. And the reason that's chosen is because that is the way that your orchestra is going to sound the best. You need this, 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 and this in those ratios in order to make the best sound. So if we take a look at the ratio, and remember I said fractions are parts of a whole. In this ratio, we do want the ratio of violas to all of the other instruments. So if we do that and we add all of them up, if you have 18, 8, 6, and 3, if you want to pause and figure that out, you can. Otherwise, I know that the total is going to be 35. And I want the number of violas, so 8. So 8 to 35, we have violas. You can write that again with the word 2 or 8. 35ths of the orchestra are violas. Now we're going to do a ratio that is double basses to cellos. So I'm going to go ahead and do that in fractional form, and I am going to do, so double basses is 3, and cellos is 6. Now anybody who looks at that is going to say, oh, wait a minute, Mrs. McKinley, that looks like a fraction that is not simplified. Exactly. So you can simplify this. It's technically called an equivalent ratio by dividing the top and the bottom by that fancy form of 1, which will be a 3/3. And we are going to get, and you probably saw it right away, 1 to 2. So for every 1 double bass you add, you need 2 cellos. That's your ratio. I like to think of ratios in terms of some of those mixes that you get, trail mix. I like 3 M&Ms per every 1 raisin. And I like 2 almonds per every 3 M&Ms. So those are the ratios that I like and I think are the tastiest in some of the trail mix that we use. Okay, so the equivalent ratios I just showed you, they work exactly the same. as equivalent fractions. You are sometimes you are multiplying them depending on what you want to find out, and sometimes you are dividing them. So take a look at this. We have 5 to 15. So let's say we need 5 M&Ms to every 15 peanuts in our trail mix. So let's say we have 60 peanuts. Now those of you with peanut allergies, you wouldn't want this, but just for our example, let's do that. What would we multiply 15 by to get 60? Well, hopefully you saw it's by 4. And since it has to be a fancy form of 1, we're going to do 4 over 4, and the question mark is going to be equal to 20. So you'll need 20 M&Ms if you have your 60 peanuts or cashews or whatever you like with your M&Ms. So in this example, we are going to do a comparison between Sophia and Leonard. And let's say that Sophia really is kind of a great quarterback, a lot like Mrs. McKinley. And let's say she was the all-time quarterback and she completed 3 of her 4 passes during her game. And the next day, she had a shorter recess, but Leonard got more passes off and he completed 7 out of 10 passes. And we're going to compare 3 completed passes to 4 attempts, and then 7 completed passes to 10 attempts, and see which one has the better, did the best. You can do this a couple of ways. You can definitely try to find that common denominator. So if you wanted to do 20, you would multiply 5 over 5, and that would be 15 20ths. And this would be times 2. It would be 14 20ths. And you can see Sophia did slightly better. Now, you could also say, well, I know that if I do, remember back in the day when we made this into a fraction, what's 3 divided by 4? And we put that decimal there, and we do our little fraction. This one sits on the top. And you can divide it out just like we used to when we were doing this. So 7 times 4 is 28. Bring it on down then. So 4 into 20 goes 5, so 0.75. And then we're going to do 7 divided by 10. Bring this up. 10 goes into 7D 7 times, and it's going to get to be a 0. So you're comparing 0.75 to 0.7, cows come home 0, 7, 0. So you can see again, whether you do the fraction or you do the decimal, it's easy to see which is bigger. So what I want you to do is make an attempt at these 5 questions. You can go ahead and pause. For the first 2, I'm using the example up here, the 18 violins, violas. So make sure you try that. And then when you unpause the video, see if you have gotten each one correct. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple of these, and the one that I thought might be tricky to start with is I'm asking for the number of violas to double basses, which is 8 to 3. And in this case, you might be tempted to make it into a mixed number. Keep it as this improper fraction when you're dealing with ratios. Again, you can write it, if you prefer, as 8 to 3 or 8:3 to make sure, well, it is a ratio and you don't want anybody to not know that it's an actual ratio. So if I'm looking for the ratio of cellos to violins, I got 6 to 18, and I saw right away I can reduce that. I can make an equivalent ratio. So I divided it by 6 over 6, same as I do with fractions, and I ended up with 1 to 3. and then I put or 1 to 3 or 1 to 3. All of those would be correct on a test. The only reason it would not be correct is if they ask specifically for you to do all 3 ways, to write them 3 ways. Usually you can choose which way you like. In this one, I saw that 7 times a 5 is 35, and since I know it's a fancy form of 1 right here, I said, well, what times 5 is 50? Well, anybody can see that that would be 10. Same here, I saw this is dividing. So to make this equivalent ratio, I had to divide by 4 over 4. That makes my question mark an 8. In this one, I could have made it into a fraction, and I saw right away that 2 to 4 reduces to the equivalent ratio of 1/2. Well, I know that half of 35 is, 16, 17, 18 in that range. That's not even close to half. And so I knew that 1/2 is much bigger than 7 out of 35. Or 7 to 35. So I knew that it was greater than. Please feel free if you see these and you need to compare to find that common denominator, or go back to this technique up here where you do the division. Okay, that's always a valid way to do it. This assignment should be very simple for most of you if you realize what you're doing. Just remember there is a slight difference between fractions and ratios. We just use ratios for different reasons, as I showed you below. Have a great assignment. Please come see me if you have any questions at all. I'm happy to help.